I'm Ronan Chris Murphy, and welcome back to Ask Ronan Turbo Monday. But we're actually not doing that this time. We're going to do Ronan Asks Turbo Monday, because I have a chance here to have somebody who's got some different perspective than I do. So I'm going to hit him up with questions.
And I'm going to give turbo answers.
And turbo answers, because we got 5 minutes. So my guest is Michael Laskow, who a lot of people know as the founder of Taxi and at taxi.com. And if you don't know what Taxi is, well, there's a long explanation, but basically it's a way that tries to connect sort of content creators with music industry sources that need it, I guess.
Yeah,
so
we connect songwriters, artists, and composers with record companies, publishers, and music supervisors and music libraries.
Yeah, so you've got music supervisors looking for music for a film. They kind of reach out to your membership, or I know in the past you've had like some major label producers who needed artists for their pop singers and things like that. So you kind of try and match those together.
And we do a lot of it. We've been doing it for 23 years.
Yeah, and also I'm going to be at, they do a great rally, big conference every year, which I'm going to be at in about 2 weeks.
No, it's actually about 10 days.
Yikes.
It's called the Taxi Road Rally. It's November 5th through the 8th in Los Angeles. And if I can plug it, which I'm doing whether you want me to or not, it's free. For every Taxi member gets a ticket for him or herself and a guest of their choice.
Yeah, and I do it every year. It's kind of one of my favorites. And mostly, as we were talking about earlier before we had the camera on, it's just a fun hang. Yeah. You know, I speak at conferences all over the world, and it's probably my favorite just because it's a fun hang with the people who show up, the other people who are teaching workshops and stuff there.
And it is like 2,000 plus people from all over the world. Quite amazing in that regard.
All right.
And it's a very warm, non-competitive environment.
Yeah. You ready to answer some questions?
I am.
Clock starts now.
Okay.
All right. So, I mean, one of the things you're obviously dealing with is a lot of people trying to get music into like film and television. Mm-hmm. What are the most common problems? What do people get wrong all the time? Because, you know, these days everybody's like, oh yeah, I want my stuff to be in TV shows and movies. You know, what are the common mistakes? Because I'm sure you see the whole range from like brilliant stuff that's perfect to stuff that's way off the map. What's the most consistent problems?
There are two categories of music, and I'm really oversimplifying this, but two categories of music. Instrumental music that goes into mostly reality shows. Mm-hmm. Forget the score that you might have on a show like NCIS. That's generally scored. But you have instrumental cues, which are generally about 90 seconds to 2 minutes long, and people want to show their compositional brilliance. What the editors and music supervisors need is something that kind of starts at the chorus with little to no intro and stays on a central motif throughout and adds layers of interest by adding and subtracting instrumentation as you go, and it ends on a buttoned ending. Mm-hmm. Da-da-da-da-da-da. So you can cut to the next scene.
Yeah.
So people want to submit 5-minute long pieces that go from this idea to that idea, all these different things like they're scoring a movie. Mm-hmm. You can't use that because it's not scored to picture. So that's where they make the mistakes in the instrumental world. Just one simple, catchy thing that ends on a button. For songs, they want stuff that sounds like records on the charts very frequently, if it's a contemporary movie. But it's all about the lyrics being universal. And what that means is you can't have a song that talks about, my friend Ronan and I went out and played a round of golf today, because where the hell are you going to use it? Even if it's a movie like Sideways that takes place on a golf course a lot, it's got my friend Ronan's name in it. And
which I strongly endorse, of course.
Yes, of course. But you could talk about me and my friend hanging out, and that would work well for a scene like that, because it's a general, universal thought. So that's the single best advice I can give on songs, is make your lyrics universal and not specific.
Cool. And I know one thing it's a term I hear a lot in Taxi, and you talk about broadcast quality, which I think is just sort of Taxi speak to it sounds pro. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, but there are different levels of pro. Yes, I actually invented the term, or stole the term, broadcast quality from Panasonic talking about their video cameras. But back in the day, you either had a really crappy, prior to ADAT, you had really crummy like 4-track studios, or you had a 24-track pro studio. And in the middle, somebody with a laptop and reasonably good recording chops makes something that is I call broadcast quality, which
Yeah.
means it's good enough to make it on the air, but it doesn't have to sound like a record. It's
Yeah.
great if it does. Could also be a guy with an acoustic guitar with old rusty strings and a voice like Tom Waits, but if the emotion there and the recording is clean and solid, that too is broadcast quality.
So I know a lot of how you work is, your members will submit stuff and you've got pros that work for you who kind of sort it out and so often give them feedback about why something worked or didn't work. And a lot of people who talked to me at the rally said, oh, I need help because my stuff's getting sent back saying not broadcast quality.
Right.
What are the kind of mistakes that you're seeing? What are people doing that, puts that red flag out for what you guys call screeners?
Right.
That says this isn't broadcast quality. What are the most common mistakes you see across the board?
Stuff that sounds way too thin. An acoustic guitar sounds like they were strumming it with a razor blade. Stuff that's way too bottom heavy. Stuff that sounds like it's got really old-fashioned synth. Like they used the Yamaha DX7 from back in the day, and they're doing horn and string parts on that. It just sounds old and tacky and not very pro. They don't have to have a $1,000 string program. They should have a $200 string program and know how to use it well.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the things you've seen that are of your best successes? What is it, the thing that got the cool placements in films or pushed? Is there any quality that you see over and over again, the things that, really push beyond or rise above the pack?
Simplicity. Simplicity always wins. Music in film and TV, music is generally not the star. It's to create, to support an underlying emotion in the scene. It's to create atmosphere. You've just walked into a bar. Is it?
We don't have Michael Laskow very often, so I'll let this run a little bit longer.
It's to create a mood and atmosphere. You could be walking into a Roadhouse hickey bar, and you would hear twangy country music on the jukebox 50 feet away in the background. If we walked into a bar with $500 hookers and very expensive martinis, it would probably be light jazz. So understanding, don't think like a musician, like you're trying to win some award at Berkeley. Think like you're a music supervisor and you have a problem to solve.
Nice. So one last thing, because a lot of people know you as this, industry guy who's about the music business and connecting it, but you were also an engineer just like me for a lot of years. What's your favorite production you were ever a part of? And do you have a favorite moment that ever happened in the studio?
Okay. Favorite production, those, that's impossibly hard to answer.
What are some of the bigger things you got to work with?
I've worked with Neil Young, I've worked with Eric Clapton, I've worked with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Firefall, just a bunch of great people. But probably my favorite record that I am most proud of is the least known of all those. There was an artist named Melanie. I got a brand new pair of roller skates. I did a double live album in the studio with Melanie's full and fairly large band. We did the same, I forget how many songs, over and over, 10 nights in a row with 30 different people sitting on the floor, smoking weed, drinking wine, drinking beer, farting, burping, whatever. And we just did it like it was a live performance, but in the studio. And the vibe was so incredible. I don't think we had 10 overdubs on that whole record. All her vocals were live. She had people sitting in her feet, playing her acoustic guitar and singing the vocal live.
Is Leftover Wine from those sessions?
No. I don't think we did that. So I know the song, but we didn't do it on it.
Melanie, this is going way over 5 minutes. I'm sorry, guys, but we got Michael. If you don't know Melanie, everybody knows her from her goofy roller skate song, which is I got a brand new pair. Check out her stuff. Get a compilation of her music. Go to Spotify, because she is heavy. I mean, she's just badass. I mean, it's almost like Janis Joplin power. When she's ripping, she is a serious, hardcore, awesome artist.
The record I worked on with her is called Ballroom Streets, and you can get it online. I think they took a couple songs off for the digital version of it. Ballroom Streets, amazing. And in engineering it live, with knowing that we weren't doing overdubs and having to send a PA mix out to the audience, and the guys playing in the band preferred to use wedge monitors instead of headphones. It was a bitch. And I was still a fairly new engineer with probably 3 years under my belt.
Yep.
So that was quite an accomplishment. We actually used a protractor to figure out angles of rejection in the room before we laid everything out. Very, very proud of that record. What was the second question?
You know, what's your kind of favorite moment in the studio? All the times you worked?
Getting a call from my then business partner. I was at a lawyer's office in a high-rise in Fort Lauderdale, and he goes, dude, Neil Young is in the lobby. And I'd worked with Neil when he was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at Criteria. And, you know, Neil was not famous for making great-sounding records. Engineers didn't want to work with him because it was kind of embarrassment to have your name in his record because the stuff sounded so raw. And so I raced back to the studio. I walked in, and Neil knew me as an assistant engineer from like 3 years before. He goes, hey, man, hey, I know you. You want to do a record? And I said, yeah, when? He goes, now. Picked up the phone, called Warner Brothers in Burbank, and said, hey, this is Neil Young calling. Can you please deposit my $1 million advance in my account? I'm going to do a record. Where am I? At Triad Recording in Fort Lauderdale, and create a we'll send you a PO. And I said, okay, when do you want to start? He goes, right now. We walk out to the car. He had a 54 Ford station wagon with like 10 acoustic guitars. We carried him into the studio, let him acclimate to the room, and he said, let's go. And we worked together for like 90 days on what became Comes a Time, Rust Never Sleeps, and maybe Stars and Bars. Awesome. And it was just Neil, myself, and my assistant. And Neil would walk around the studio with a guitar strapped on, kind of writing as he was walking, and just noodling and singing. And my assistant had to follow him around with an 87 on a boom. And then a week or two later, he'd go, hey, remember like last Thursday at like 4:03 p.m. in the afternoon, I was singing this song, you know, whatever lyric, and my assistant would be, yeah, I've got it. And Neil would say, put that up. And then he'd sing a background vocal and overdub a piano, and that made it on the record.
And I've several friends who work with him, and they always said, oh yeah, never give Neil a rough mix of anything, because you've just given him the master.
I've got to show you something. If I can pop out of the chair for 1 second. Neil and I were going to Nashville, I think. Hopefully I'm still in the frame. And this was from 1978. And we were going to Nashville, and we had done some rough mixes. And I thought, you know, some of this stuff is pretty good. Maybe I should make a safety of it. So about 3 years ago, my wife and I were cleaning out the garage. We find a lime green suitcase that I'd had since the 70s. We open it up, and inside I see NY Safety. And I thought, New York Safety, New York Safety. What the hell would I have made a safety from New York? And then I looked on the side. Oh, look at that. Safety number 2, Neil Young. This is Comes a Time on 1/4 inch before the bass and drums and violins and 16 acoustic guitar players. This is just Neil and his acoustic guitar and sometimes a piano and a background vocal right there, baby. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. My one little piece of like, well, I got a few sort of geeky cool things, but my little neat historical thing in my studio is I've got a couple of channel strips from Neil Young's old Quad 8 console from Broken Arrow. So that he did, you know, some of the Harvest album and some of the Crazy Horse stuff. So yeah, so it's always fun. I mean, they sound great, of course, but it's always kind of fun working with a singer, especially like a folky or something like that, and going, so do you want to cut your vocals through Neil Young's Mike Prees? And like, yeah.
It's funny because Neil, you know, has now turned into this like audio aficionado. But he once said to me, on Comes a Time, he said, no limiters. No EQ, and I'm like, what? Come on, you're kidding me, aren't you? And he said, man, it's not about the sounds of the instruments. It's not about your engineering. It's about the performance. And that's why I brought that up on the show with you before. He's the guy who taught me, capture the performance. Nothing else really matters.
So awesome. Well, kept you all way more than 5 minutes, but you guys were lucky that we did that because we had Michael Laskow. And yeah, and if you want to check out more of what he does, go to taxi.com and you can get all sorts of info about what he does. So next week, I will be back answering your questions. So make sure you go here and leave me questions if you want them answered. And don't forget to subscribe here to stay up to date on all of the Ask Ronan shows and all of the other recording videos that I do. See ya. Thanks.